Hi there, and welcome to the Surviving and Thriving in Residency podcast. I'm Charley Lowry, your host and Director of GME Relations at PracticeLink. This show is all about exploring the world of graduate and undergraduate medical education. We'll dive into the real-life experiences, successes, and challenges faced by medical students, residents, and fellows, while also highlighting valuable tools to support you, whether that's financial planning, student aid, or the many free resources provided by PracticeLink. If you're thinking about med school, currently studying, or deep into residency or fellowship, this podcast is here to offer insights and support to make your journey a bit easier than those before you. Today's guests are Dr. Elle MacAlpine, a resident at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, class of 2028, and Dr. Parker Mathews, an internal medicine resident at Washington University, class of 2027. Thanks for joining today. How are you both doing?
Well, doing well. Just got back from a week in Kansas City visiting Parker's family, and I'm about halfway through my second year through my night float block. Parker just finished up an ICU stint, and so doing well.
Wow, staying busy, but time for family is always a good thing, right?
We've been able to find a pretty surprisingly good balance, I would say, this year. I mean, it has been one of Elle's hardest clinical years, and I think in a lot of programs, the first year is considered to be the most demanding or the most challenging, but we have been able to manage it and take time off to travel a little bit and see our families. The time that we're here in St. Louis working is typically very demanding, and it is challenging as a couple, both of us doing this to navigate that and find time for the hobbies and relationships that we find important. But I think that's something, just right off the bat to be thinking of at every step going through this process. It's finding the right program and the right community that will allow you to have and maintain your interests and relationships outside of this career, because that's obviously very important. And I think that's a huge factor in how we're both staying sane at this point in time.
Well, and Kansas City is pretty close, so that's good. You probably both have family scattered out, I'm sure, a lot farther away, right? So that makes it a little harder.
Yeah, and your family kind of signs up for this when you sign up for this. And I'm 5 years into this now. Elle is 6 years into this now. And it can be challenging for your family to come to terms with the working holidays and living somewhere far away, and that level of uncertainty with the various stages, including the match and then fellowship and all these other things. I think that can be challenging to explain to your parents and your cousins and your siblings, right? We have both found ourselves, and you will find yourself going through this process, explaining to your grandfather the intricacies of the match 15 times before it clicks.
Let's kick it off a little bit with what led you to pursue medicine? Do you remember how old you were and what made you make that decision?
Yeah, so I was very interested in the sciences. In high school, I did some genetics research and had this privilege to go to high school with a very strong science program. Went into college thinking I was going to do biotech, like med consulting, something science related, but more on the business side or admin side. I then, did all the pre-med classes just because they were consistent with some of those bio classes. Found myself interested in them, and then did a summer internship actually in orthopedics at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, just a job I got to get a little more clinical exposure. Loved the energy of that academic environment. Loved the clinical relationship my mentors had with their pediatric patients and their families, and just was really energized by that environment and knew subject matter wise that I would be interested enough in medical school that I decided to pursue it. And I also had a different internship working at a tech firm that was great. And it was like the most fun job environment you could have, which this was back in 2015. And, there's the full drink fridge and a ping pong office, which at the time was very revolutionary and cool. And I still found myself not wanting to work a desk job. And so decided to pursue medicine at that point.
Yeah, somewhat of a similar story, like in school and growing up, definitely gravitated towards the math and science kind of courses. Was looking for some community service opportunities in high school, and I ended up volunteering in an emergency department at St. Luke's Hospital in Kansas City, where I grew up. It's a big level 1 trauma center, kind of soft academic hospital. They're affiliated with a medical school, but have more of a private practice, community practice kind of feel, and really just fell in love with that. I like being in the emergency room. There were some great nurses and doctors who showed me probably a lot more than a high school volunteer in an emergency room should necessarily be shown or be doing. But it was really fun, and I just fell in love with it right away and knew that I wanted to do something in healthcare. That led me to get my EMT license, which I did when I was 18, and started working kind of part-time for a fire department in one of the Kansas City suburbs. Really enjoyed that work as well, but knew that I wanted to pursue this at a higher level. And then throughout college, just kind of maintained that interest. Enjoyed some of the pre-med classes, certainly not all. And for the people that are in pre-med stage there is light at the end of the tunnel. You can toss that organic chemistry knowledge out of your brain and never return to it if you don't want to. So really just kind of maintained that interest all along, and had the privilege of being at good schools all the way through with good mentors. Definitely gave me a leg up at numerous steps in the process, and never looked back.
So you both went to Duke, right, for your medical school?
Yeah, and I was there for my undergraduate as well. Elle was up north at Dartmouth for her undergrad.
Duke was the only medical school I got into. I got in off the wait list. So for all of those waiting for their letters, it's a very strange process with no predictability.
So tell me about that. Like, how many schools did you apply to, and what was the deciding factor? Well, for you, for Duke, it sounds like the deciding factor was they accepted you, right?
Yeah, nicely. I mean, medical school applications were one of the hardest, like emotionally hardest things I've done so far. They were much harder than residency applications. Residency has its own problems with inflexibility, and you're signing up for what is ultimately a more time-intensive period, but at a kind of more pivotal stage of your life where you feel like you want to be settling down. Medical school applications are very stressful. I think I applied to about 20 schools. I applied, in 2018 to 2019 season. So this was pre-COVID, pre a lot of changing mentalities about test scores and demographics and interviews. And so I'm sure the culture has changed very much even in that short amount of time. But I applied to about 20 schools with a focus on New England, because that's where I'm from. New Hampshire does not have any affiliated state school that I had any kind of advantage at financially or in an admissions process, which is a little bit of a bummer. I think I got a decent number of interviews, maybe 8. It's hard to remember the specific numbers, but enough that I felt relatively comfortable. And at the time, at least, the admissions would all be rolling, like on a rolling basis. So you could get accepted in medical school a week after your interview or in March. And I got denied from a few right away, certainly, and then got waitlisted a few, and then did not hear from many of them until March, at which point I got a bunch of waitlists. And it was a difficult time. I mean, I had good grades, I had an interesting application, I had good mentors at a pretty good hospital, came from a good school. So I didn't know, not that I was the superstar applicant, but I couldn't put my finger on any one area that I really needed to optimize or come back from. I think my MCAT score was decent as well. So it was a hard time because it felt very personal. It felt like, I knew my MCAT score was trash, or it's really hard to get from this sort of lesser known school and not have the mentors, X, Y, and Z. And so it felt very personal. And it was emotionally very difficult because it's this thing I wanted so bad, and it felt like my life was on hold until that happened. I had a lot of decisions to make about whether or not I wanted to stay at CHOP for another year, whether or not I wanted to reapply to medical school the next year or in following years. It's an expensive process to apply to medical school. All the interviews were in person at that point. I was so lowly at my job, you had to be taking all this time from your job for interviews. And I decided to stay at CHOP for another year, and I had signed a lease to stay in my apartment. And then the next day, Duke gave me a call, and Duke was a school I loved. When I interviewed, I just loved the energy there. They hadn't accepted anybody off the wait list in years, so I had written it off and was very excited and said yes right away, and we figured it out, and I begged my apartment to release me from my lease, and the rest was history. So I didn't have a difficult decision to make, I suppose, but I just remember I'm a pretty emotionally stable person, and somebody who doesn't take my losses too hard, but I remember the medical school application process to be particularly difficult, non-linear, non-logical, and emotionally straining.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because you're just sitting there waiting day after day after day, right? And for months.
At least for residency, there's a match day.
Right. I mean, it's all contained for residency within a week, right? So, if you don't match, you only have 4 days to get it all done. So I know it would have to be excruciating just sitting there waiting and the clock ticking. So
I have a similar experience to Elle, I would say, with the medical school application process. I agree it was more stressful writ large than the residency application process, which I'm sure we'll get into. I think a couple takeaways from the medical school cycle. I found it to be pretty similar to Elle, applied to about the same number of schools, probably 20 or so, tried to do a relatively wide range of quote unquote competitive and less competitive schools. Although once you really get into it, every medical school is fairly competitive at the end of the day. And every medical school is looking for something different, but it can be hard to ascertain what that is. And it can be frustrating because you may feel that even if there's not a deficiency with your application or your person or the things you've done, that medical school may just not be looking for you specifically as a person at that time in that year. And I know there's a lot of high politically related kind of things happening with admissions across the country with regards to demographics and equity and disparities, all those kind of things. I don't know that I have much to comment on that per se, but that's another angle to it that factors into some of these decisions. And all this is happening behind closed doors. So you get a yes, a maybe, or a no. The waitlisting process also can be really challenging. I found myself probably in January, February on a number of waitlists without an acceptance yet. Was lucky enough to be accepted at Duke right away without the whole waitlist thing, so I didn't have to deal with being on the waitlist for as long as Elle was. But that is just a really unsettling time. You have your friends, your family, everybody's asking you all the time, have you heard anything? No, not yet, fingers crossed. So it takes a lot of patience. It's a trying time. You're hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. And then you get to a point where you have to think about having a backup plan. I will just say, it worked out by the skin of our teeth for Elle and I both on the first time, but we have a number of friends in medical school and residency now who it did not work out for the first time around and ended up reapplying and being accepted to great medical schools like Duke or elsewhere. And I think that goes to show how unpredictable and ambiguous the process can be. There are unfortunately great candidates every year that don't end up where they want to be.
Do you think a lot of programs or a lot of schools just look at test scores and don't go beyond that? Do you think that's common?
I hope not. I think it could be in the preliminary stages just by a sheer numbers game. I do think that everyone is advertising and saying that they are doing a holistic review. Neither of us have personally been on an admissions committee or anything, so we don't have that experience to speak to. But I would expect that, yes, a low score can hurt you and maybe result in you being screened out at certain medical schools. But I do think there is much more to it than that.
Yeah. So when I applied to residency, I was the last class where step 1 was a major factor. So it's now pass fail, and now it's step 2, and people, I think, are still figuring out how that factors in. But for both med school and residency, I've heard, at least to a certain extent, that the test scores may be a screening one just to get down some numbers, but the threshold is lower than you might think, and certainly quite a bit lower than their average admission score. And then it's sort of a wash once you get the interview. So once you get the interview, they've already decided that whatever score you've gotten is acceptable given the rest of your paper application. And they're deciding much more on building a class, on how you did during the interview, on how you fit, whatever that means. For better or for worse, I think the fanciest schools with the biggest endowments and the biggest reputation and the most prestige have a lot more agency to go beyond the test score. I think that they're not so worried about their rankings falling or their reputation falling. Maybe they have more funding within the admissions committee to hire more people. I don't know exactly how it all breaks down, but I kind of heard rumors, and it anecdotally has seemed true, that to a certain extent, if you have a low test score but a really compelling application, you might get denied at every single safety school. There's no such a thing in an MD application program, but you might not even get an interview at kind of your home state school, and then you might get into Penn, or get an interview. And I think residency was similar, where the fanciest programs had a little more agency to ignore a poor step score if you had really compelling research, really compelling story.
Yeah, there's no guidebook, right? There's no set pattern, it seems like, for a lot of it. But now, did you two meet at Duke?
We met during my first year. Parker was working in a lab at Duke. and had some mutual mentors and ended up meeting. So that made the admission process a little more exciting. I remember we had been dating for most of the year, but it was still early times that the question of how serious would a long distance relationship be was real, but also you're not serious enough for Parker to make a very major life decision on where to go to medical school based on me alone. So it was convenient for me that Duke was the obvious option for him. I remember I was on the IRB as a medical student, which was a really cool experience. And it's very closed door. It was in-person meetings and it was very closed door. I'm also the most junior person. So I have my printed applications that I'm reviewing and presenting, and I have my phone off and my computer off, and it's 2.5 hours of the most dense material you can possibly imagine. And I emerged from this meeting one day, and Parker had gotten into Duke. We didn't know what day they were going to release acceptances. I think step 1 had gone pass fail, and my entire medical school group chat was I came out of the meeting 500 text messages. It's whoa, this is crazy.
And then COVID happened 2 weeks after that.
Yeah. We were at a play during COVID, and during it, also phones off. We came out during intermission, and all the classes are canceled. So, and then the next night, the play was canceled.
So tell me just a little bit about medical school. Looking back on it now, I'm sure it seems like it's been forever ago at this point, even though it hasn't been. What would you do differently? Or if you could give advice to folks in medical school today, what would you tell them maybe to worry about or maybe worry less about? Any words of wisdom or any words of advice looking back on your path that you would give a current medical student?
Well, I'm a year closer to medical school than Elle was, so I guess I can go first. You're right. It does feel like a long time ago, even though it was 7 months ago for me, 8 months ago. Residency, which we'll talk about more, goes by very fast and very slow at the same time. I think a couple of major reflections on medical school. There is a lot of chronic low-level anxiety throughout this whole process. A lot of that in medical school is driven by numbers, which, obviously people lean on because they're an easy way to quantify your performance, and because everyone who's made it to medical school is a good test taker and has gotten good grades and cares about that. Fortunately, most, if not all, of the major MD medical schools now are pass-fail in the kind of entry-level coursework, which I think is a terrific thing. I cannot imagine having done graded medical school, especially on the accelerated timeline that we did it. So Duke does a kind of accelerated curriculum, which we can talk about more later. I don't want to bore the audience here with Duke specifics, but Duke does the preclinical prior to step 1 teaching in 1 year that has classically been done in 2 years. So everything is condensed very fast, coming at you like water out of a fire hydrant. But anyway, I think it's very easy and natural to get stuck in that cycle about how do I study the most efficiently, the fastest, all the time, so I can do the best on step 1 or step 2 or whatever it is. And by doing that, you can lose sight of some of the softer skills that it's very important to learn in medical school, whether it's physical examination maneuvers, how do you examine and assess a patient, whether it's having difficult conversations with patients, whether it's explaining the risks and benefits of common medications or procedures, or talking to family members about a poor prognosis, like these things that you really do have to do kind of on day 1 of residency. It's easy to underemphasize those and emphasize learning the raw, random facts, what mutation causes this rare neurologic disorder that may or may not be on step 1, right? It's important to do enough of that you have that foundational knowledge and that you can do well on the test. But I think it's more important to really pay attention to the clinical teaching and the mentorship from established doctors, attendings, people who are experts, and just absorbing or learning some of those soft skills from them. That's probably my number 1 takeaway, and I'll let Elle share, and then I may have more.
Thinking back, the preclinical, I guess, conflicting advice is one, when it's pass-fail, it truly does not matter how you do. But at the same time, you need to learn for the step exams. But I also wouldn't be in the back of the classroom doing Anki. There's a lot of clinical teaching and wisdom to be gleaned. It's beyond just purely memorizing the facts. I think more importantly, going on into your clerkships and then some of your sub-Is and some of the required core 4th year rotations, So I'm in orthopedics, it's a little more specialized, and then Parker's internal medicine. I'll kind of make fun of him. I do think medical school is built to create a really great internal medicine intern. That is what the curriculum is targeted at. That's what the tests are mostly targeted at. I mean, of course, you do OBGYN and you do surgery. Fortunately and unfortunately, who tends to do most of the teaching, at least at Duke, it tended to be those are the people that were most invested in medical school education, were in giving lectures and giving clinical talks, were a lot of people that were on various branches of internal medicine and lesser extent emergency medicine and pediatrics. So it can be sometimes frustrating if you decide on something that's a little more subspecialized earlier. You feel like you're learning all this information to just memorize and dump on the test. And that's probably a little bit true for some of the just pure technical information. But I try to approach every clerkship with a ton of curiosity. And I think I learned a lot about how to talk with patients, how to work on teams. Because even in residency, even though I'm doing orthopedics, there's a lot of rotations that are not the most fun or not what I envision my future being, and still being able to work effectively on those services and work effectively on teams is so key. And some of my favorite rotations in medical school were my psych ED rotation and my SICU rotation. And certainly not looking to do either of those with my career at this point. So I think kind of you're assigned to that rotation for 6 weeks or 4 weeks, making the best of it, learning what you can, trying to be present on the hours that you have to be there. You don't have to be a gunner and go above and beyond, but trying to be present and make the most because you're paying to be there.
I think one of the professors I spoke to on the podcast said the advice would be don't ever ask how many rotations do I have to do, but how many can I possibly do, because you are paying for it at the end of the day. Make the most of it, get the most out of it that you can.
And there's a lot to be offered outside of specific rotations in terms of research and shadowing and also just living a little bit of a normal adult life. So I don't think you necessarily have to get every dollar's worth, but I think trying to exactly approach everything with curiosity is important.
At PracticeLink, we believe tomorrow's healthcare leaders deserve support today. That's why we created the First Practice Fund, a scholarship program awarding $2,500 to 6 dedicated individuals preparing for their first practice. The next application window opens soon. Don't miss your opportunity. Your future is waiting. Find out more at PracticeLink.com. So anything else for medical school? Anything else you'd like to say about that before we start talking about residency?
2 things. I think thing number 1 is that while it's going to feel very hard and probably will be the hardest thing that you have done at that point in time, it will not be the hardest thing that you do. And you will learn that when you get to residency, which is not to scare anyone about residency. Residency is great in many ways. But try and remember that. Yes, it's going to be hard, but it's also going to be a really fun time in your life. And we both made, really great lifelong friends in medical school. We both had a lot of other exciting and major things happen in our personal and family lives. During that period of time, we traveled, we did all sorts of stuff, picked up new hobbies. It should be fun, and you will look back on it like a fun period of time in your life, although it is stressful. And I've heard that from a lot of doctors that will reflect on their medical school years and see them as some of the best years in their life. So that's point number 1. And then I think point number 2, this is a really difficult one, but I think there's a very hard balance to strike when thinking about what you want to specialize in and what residency you want to do, where you want to remain open-minded, to Elle's point earlier, where you really want to maximize the value that you take from each rotation. You also do need to practically think about preparing for your residency application. And unfortunately, you need to really start thinking about that very early in the process to be the best positioned. Not to say you can't make a last minute change in plans or adjustment. And I have several close friends who did that, made up their minds late or delayed and took an extra year of medical school to do research. That reminds me of that whole concept, which Elle and I have talked about very much. We both did medical school in 4 years. I am somewhat concerned by what I think we see as a growing trend towards people taking longer than 4 years to complete medical school. At our medical school, that was often done with additional research years, where people for whatever reason, oftentimes because they were applying to something more competitive for residency, felt that they needed more time to do research or otherwise improve their application, would take an additional year to do that. I am opposed to that in general, unless it is done very thoughtfully and for the right reasons. And I think there are certainly use cases where that's the right thing to do. But I do worry that we shouldn't really be promoting that so much because this is already a very long process. And I don't think it is necessarily wise to take additional time unless you have a very compelling reason to do that.
At Duke, again, not to get into the particulars of Duke, but a research year is built in. You do the 1 year preclinical, the 1 year of your clerkships, 1 year research, and 1 year of the fourth year rotations. The research year is wonderful, lots of shadowing in your specialty, great research. And I think at programs, it might just be a reality that at programs that are not Duke, you might need a little more dedicated time to do research. And I certainly think being in orthopedics, it's something we see very, very commonly. I do think it can be done in 4, but I understand why if you switch specialties late, you need to make up for a lower step score, different reasons to take the research year. But I think I agree with Parker that it has to be intentional at Duke. I think we had a lot of people with bad test anxiety who end up testing excellent. However, they just keep saying, I need another month. I need another month. I need another month. All of a sudden, they use their whole research year on taking step 1 and step 2, have done no research, now need another year to figure out what they want to do research. Their application isn't together yet, and it just sort of one thing rolls into the other, and there's not a lot of intentionality behind it. I do think it's a different story. You want to get Masters of Public Health, an MBA. You want to do basic science so that your project has at minimum a 2-year time span to really get up and moving. But I think trying to avoid the just anxiety about application quality or test scores and just trying to move the process forward. I think then that's going off of Parker. 2 other things to say about medical school that are sort of conflicting. One is that residency is better in many ways. It's worse in many ways. It's so much more tiring. It's so much more intensive. You think that you don't have to study as much. I don't know anything about orthopedics. You learn once you're in orthopedics, and I have to study a ton. For those of you who are doers, it's so much more rewarding to be a cog in the machine, to actually be a useful member of the team, to be able to put in orders, even as the intern where you're at the bottom of the totem pole, to be able to move the team forward and be a useful factor in the team. In medical school, I found myself very exhausted by feeling like I was just taking up space. Even if I was the perfect amount of curious and helpful and I got split material ready and all that, at the end of the day, you're a non-necessary member of the team. And no matter how much people say, you were so helpful. And it just is exhausting to feel that way. And residency is so much better in that way. You're in the specialty that you love and you're useful. And that's wonderful. So if you don't love medical school, it doesn't mean that it's not for you. I think things can feel a lot different in residency. There's a lot of things that are great that come with it as much as there's cons. But the flip side is, I think it's easy to have a mentality of, just one more step. Medicine is so linear, so stepwise, so planned out that you can just sort of discount your life and just, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and that's going to be different. Residency sucks, and medicine sucks, and as you you see some of your friends in other industries having a lot more free time, having a lot more flexibility. Maybe they're starting families. Maybe they're starting businesses.
Making more money.
Making more money for the simple act of having a weekend, being able to go to a lake or something on a weekend. And I think in medical school, although there are real financial questions surrounding what kind of debt you've accrued and what kind of investment you've made, I do think a medical degree can be really useful in other fields. And if you don't love at least part of it, you don't have to do residency. I think that's the other thing is it's just everyone's so much on the same path that it can be difficult to see other exit ramps. And if you don't love it, you should not probably go to residency, but you don't have to love every part of it because there are certain parts of residency that are much better and much more fulfilling.
I can't imagine the test anxiety that you talk about in medical school. I worked at a medical school for about 10 years with 3rd year and 4th year students, and a failure was the most horrific, shameful. It was like sucking the life out of someone. I saw students who, had a very hard time bouncing back from that. And it's just not discussed. They don't share it with their peers. You don't talk about it, And I just think that's a really tough thing also for medical students.
I think that sense of once you make it over the bridge, medical school too is different than a pre-med curriculum. They want to create doctors, whereas a pre-med curriculum to a certain extent is designed to weed people out. Not always, but in medical school, they want you to succeed. They want to figure out what caused the failure and what can be remedied to be able to move you forward. And I think residency, there's a lot more transparency and camaraderie around failures, and the failures are different. It's you absolutely getting yelled at and screamed at in OR by attendings, very rare, but things happen, getting chewed out by a patient, making the wrong diagnosis. The failures are different, but there's a lot more openness and camaraderie, I think, at the residency level than at the school level.
So yeah, that's really good for people in medical school who are listening to hear that, I'm sure. So tell me a little bit about applying to WashU and that whole process.
Yeah, so my application year was coming out of COVID. The norm, at least at my medical school, was to do 2 aways. I think 1 away was acceptable and 3 could be done, but now the norm has gone to 3 or 4, which is exhausting. I'm glad I got away with only 2.
Explain away.
So in orthopedics and some other specialties, especially surgical subspecialties, the norm is to do sort of an audition rotation, usually about 4 weeks long at a different orthopedic program. I can have a whole podcast about how you choose aways and how you divvy them up, but usually you want to spread out in terms of type of program. Are they very urban? Are they very high trauma? Are they much more academic in terms of procedure program? And then also maybe in terms of demographics. And so I did my rotations based on advice of some of my mentors at WashU and at the Mayo Clinic. I was looking more at the diversity of how the program was run. Was it more didactic and more white collar? WashU's an excellent program, but it's a little bit more down and dirty, trauma, high volume. So I had gotten the advice from many of my mentors that WashU was an excellent program, that it had, I was interested in maybe peds or onc, which are smaller orthopedic subspecialties, and was hoping to get a bigger program that would have access to those specialties at the end of the day. And so I liked my rotation here a lot. It was definitely very difficult, but I felt that the residents themselves had such a great team mentality, had such great camaraderie, and really were there for each other and really had each other's back in the classroom, in the OR, and everywhere, and had a great feel. I had some hesitations about St. Louis. Parker's family is in Kansas City, which was a plus, but my family's all in New England. I really hoped to return back to somewhere at least driving distance from them for this next stage of my life. I also had a soft spot for Duke, which was my home program, and had a lot of great mentors there and a lot of great experiences there. When push came to shove for my rank list, I tried to be pretty honest with myself about where I would be happy in terms of both the people that surrounded me and the teams that surrounded me, but also geography and life. Is this the hardest program ever where I'm going to have no life? Is this going to be a place that I want to live in terms of activities and cost of living? New York is close to my family, but I just don't want to have roommates in my 30s. And so, I knew that that was not going to be a lifestyle that I would thrive in. And so different quality of life measures, including geography, people, and activities, and cost of living, etc. WashU was high on my list, but not top of my list. And largely because I ended up prioritizing being closer to my family. I'm now so grateful that I'm here. It's been an excellent program for me. My family's been able to visit quite frequently. We've been close to Parker's family. But I had very little post-interview and post-rotation discussion with WashU. I think there's other programs where it's very much the norm to be expressing your interest on an ongoing basis, and I had very little of that. So I was very shocked when I opened my letter that it was even an option for me. And now I'm here, and I'm very happy to be here. I really love my co-residents. I love St. Louis, which is not what I was totally expecting. And I think my program is really going to set me up well for the next stages of my career.
We're not just gaslighting. We actually do like St. Louis. So.
I do too. I mean, I love it. When I first started going to St. Louis, I thought, I'm not really sure about this city, but it's incredible. It's a great place. WashU, though, your program has a great reputation. I mean, nationwide, it's got an outstanding reputation. So it's good. You landed there. Parker, I don't think I have to ask you why you ended up at WashU, right? Since you were a year behind.
Yeah, no, I certainly followed. I do not know that this would have been in the absence of our relationship and Elle being here. I do not know that this is where I would have ended up. I really liked my time in North Carolina. I lived in North Carolina for almost 10 years. It's hard to think about these abstracts and hypotheticals, right? What would have happened? But I think I would have likely either stayed in North Carolina and stayed at Duke and continued my training there because I had such a positive experience, or tried to go up northeast somewhere, Boston or New York. Now that I'm here, I'm really happy that I'm here, and I feel like this is the right place for me. I think the internal medicine application process is very different than orthopedics in many ways. I think that unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what you're applying into, residency applications are not one size fits all. The specialties vary quite a bit in terms of what the process looks like, in terms of how competitive it is, in terms of what the applications interviews are like. Internal medicine in the year that I had applied last year, so 2023 to 2024, did all virtual interviews, for example. Many surgical specialties are doing in-person interviews. Internal medicine has larger class sizes than the surgical specialties. My residency is about 40 residents per class, which is large. And so that just kind of boils down to there being significant differences in the process. A lot of it does derive from the size. Programs like mine have to interview more people, and there are logistical constraints to that, yada, yada. So that process looked a little different. I did still go into the process with a slightly open mind, knowing that I would likely and was hoping to end up here with Elle so we could be together. And we wanted for me to come to that decision on my own, so there weren't any lingering questions or regret or anything like that. And there aren't now, because I did go through that whole process. I applied probably to 20 or so programs, which I think for my application and for internal medicine is more than enough. They're doing this signaling stuff now, which we can talk about. Also varies program to program. The idea behind the signaling is that you get to communicate in your application to specific programs that you are strongly interested. And this flux year to year. I know for medicine, it changed from some kind of, 7 signals when I applied to 15 now. And then some of the programs are doing this 2-tiered signaling where there's a gold signal and a silver signal, which kind of cracks me up a little bit that you're giving gold stars or silver stars to these serious life decisions that we're making, right? But
yeah, it's like following social media, liking and loving right. Yeah, super like. Yeah.
But putting that aside, I had a positive experience with the process. I found it significantly less stressful than the medical school application process in many regards. The match itself is a force to be reckoned with. It is a uniquely unsettling and stressful process. Just the uncertainty, even though I had a good feeling that I would have a positive outcome and be where I wanted to be with Elle, you're still sitting there the week before waiting for the letter to come, and you don't know that that's going to be the case, and you don't know where you're going to be rooting. You don't know if you're going to match at all. And so that's hard on the psyche. But, the match does seem to usually work out. I think even if people don't end up in their first choice, they usually come to have a positive experience wherever they end up training, save for some rare circumstances.
You had classmates who did not match, who had to participate in the SOAP?
Mm-hmm.
I had a few friends who did not match, and I believe one of them participated in the SOAP and SOAP in family medicine and was happy with it. But most of the peers that I knew that did not match ended up taking a research year and reapplying to the match. And then in the second year, they had, a pretty introspective moment and conversation with themselves about would I rather dual apply or would I rather not be a doctor at all than not be an orthopedic surgeon or dermatologist. So that's a conversation you need to have with you and your loved ones. But I had some people who didn't match, a lot of people who match either lower or higher than they had really expected or reckoned with. For me, I was incredibly privileged to match at WashU and incredibly grateful. And it was a more prestigious program than some programs that I had ranked above it. but it was not where I had envisioned living or moving to. In addition, it's a particularly intense program. And so I was having a lot of realities fly at me about what the next 5 years were going to look like, and a lot of uncertainty in terms of Parker's upcoming match in the year ahead, which ended up being great. But, in that moment opening the letter, it's a very strange day. I think everyone wants it to be balloons and cute Instagram pics and the I'm matched and your whole family. But you have this whole audience watching you open this letter. So even if you get good news, if it's not expected news, there's a certain way that you're expected to act. You have to be happy for other people, but also you have a lot that's going on internally, or maybe there's feelings of jealousy. It's just a very weird day. I had one friend who went to Hopkins for medical school, and she had 15 of her friends from college come to her match day. I can't imagine anything worse. Even if you get what you want to kind of celebrate with your peers and see who else is maybe going to that city. And it's a very strange day. So I think even if you get the news you want and news you expected, if you kind of leave match day not feeling the best or feeling that was weird, I think that's a pretty normal reaction.
Yeah, because you have people who are at their all-time high in life and people who are at their all-time low. So if you didn't match, as opposed to someone who matched with their top choice, totally different feelings, right? And totally different emotions. And yeah, hard to celebrate that.
Yeah, luckily the match did think of that. And so you will be notified on the Monday of match week, which is actually today, March 17th, whether or not you matched. You're not notified where until Friday, and that's the big event that families and friends go to. So theoretically, you should know well in advance, not well, but several days in advance if you did not match, and you'd be able to decide how you wanted to navigate match day. Most people probably wouldn't want to be there at all if you did not match. But of course, there are people who on match day open the envelope and it's somewhere they didn't think they were going to go. It's somewhere low on their list. It's somewhere that throws a wrench in another big life plan they have. Maybe they have to move away from a spouse or a loved one or parents or something, and that can rush over you. That's a lot to deal with when you're surrounded by hundreds of people watching you. So it's not for the faint of heart, but most people have a good outcome, even if they don't recognize it right away. And in some ways, once you come to terms with what's happened, there's a little bit of comfort in the finality of it. There's no time to dwell on it. It's whatever it is, it's happening. And you have to get life moving towards that. I guess another just kind of quick point of advice is that any fourth-year medical students going into this process next year, if there's anything possible that you can do to give yourself time off after match and to be done with your medical school requirements after match, you should do that, because especially if you're moving somewhere, moving across the country, it takes a lot of time to get all that together, to get your medical license, do all these other logistical things, do all your onboarding at whatever hospital you're going to. It takes a lot of work, so it's nice to have your medical school coursework and requirements wrapped up at that point in time.
Hello, my name is Sarah Eichinger. When I applied for First Practice Fund Scholarship, I never imagined how much it would impact my journey as a physician. The $2,500 award helped me focus on what truly matters, which is caring for patients and serving my community. If you're a current medical student, resident, or advanced practice provider with a passion for making a difference, this is the opportunity for you. Applications for the second round of First Practice Fund scholarships are opening soon. Visit PracticeLink.com today to learn more.
So, do you want to talk about your first year of residency? How hard was that? What was the change like going into it? And what were the hours like? What was work-life balance like? I mean, I could ask you a million questions about the transition from medical student to resident.
Let me give Elle some time to think about it. I'm still in it, so it's all fresh in my mind. And I think my program is a lighter workload, still demanding, but a lighter workload than Elle's. Being a surgeon, classically, the surgical training programs are heavier workload than the non-surgical training programs. I started pretty early, before July 1. Classically, the start date for residency is July 1. Some programs are starting people a little bit early. We had a couple of weeks of orientation that left me feeling rather disoriented, but I think that's probably the case no matter how good the orientation is. It's just a lot of information, and it's a lot of practical stuff that you are not taught in medical school that you are suddenly responsible for logistical things that are unique to being in a new place. Most residents go somewhere other than where they trained for medical school. So you're both learning how to do a new job that's demanding, and you're learning a new city and a new hospital and the new nitty-gritty of maybe it's a new medical record, whatever. All these new things are coming at you really fast. And you're trying to meet new people, you're trying to meet your colleagues. So the first couple of months are going to be a steep learning curve, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing. But I've had a very, very positive intern year, a very positive experience. I agree with kind of the sentiments Elle shared earlier about how much more rewarding it is to be actively doing more than you were in medical school, whether it's applying some knowledge, even just writing notes that count for billing and signing orders that result in something actually happening to a patient. It's like, whoa, I have a lot of responsibility now. And that wears on you, and you're going to have long days, and you're going to be tired, and you're going to have to figure out and make changes in other aspects of your life to stay healthy, both mentally and physically. Like, it certainly is demanding, and changes will be required to multiple facets of your life to cope with that. But it's really rewarding, and it kind of feels like you have, after a lot of effort and a lot of time in school, you finally arrived at some form of a destination. Even though you're still learning, you're at one of your early destinations along your career trajectory. So that is a really special feeling, and it doesn't wear off. It hasn't worn off for me yet.
So what about, how do you stay healthy physically, mentally, emotionally?
You look healthy? I don't know.
How do you do that? You avoid the cafeteria, first of all, right? That's a start.
Sometimes it can't be avoided. Really, on nights, it can be very hard.
I allowed myself only one order of chicken tenders per week on nights.
Okay. There's some advice right there. Yeah.
Our cafeteria here could be worse. It could be better, but it could be worse. It's not that bad. It's hard. I don't know that we've found the answer to that yet. I think finding something outdoors that you can do with some regularity is really important. And thinking about where you live also to facilitate that. Because what you really want to look for are things that you can do that are active and rejuvenating and good for you, that do not require any unnecessary or extraneous time, because you don't have that extraneous time. So whether it's, we moved into an apartment instead of a house, and we had lived in a house before. Initially, I was pretty apprehensive about that. I didn't really want to live in an apartment. And now I'm so grateful that we do, because all these little things in your life that are more convenient. We have a gym here. I can go to the gym for 25 minutes if that's all I have. It doesn't take any preparation time. I'm not driving anywhere. So just being active and doing things that are good for you as efficient and easy as possible, I think, is the recipe to success. We live right next to a beautiful park. If you're ever visiting St. Louis, Forest Park, you can't miss it. We live right next to that. And just having that there allows us to be outside, ride our bikes, go for a jog, whatever it is, without the time investment before or after. So I think that's really all you can do, is just try and build into your life either a routine or just something that is easy for you to do. Even if it's not as much activity or exercise or tennis or golf or soccer, whatever you were doing before, you want to keep doing that, but you want to find a way to do it efficiently.
My job right now, especially down as a first and second year in the emergency department a lot, you're running the consults over the hospital. Actually, I have a very active job. While I may not be fit enough to go ride a 50-mile bike race or, work certain muscle groups. But when I was on consult, I just got off a night float block. I was walking probably 10 to 15 miles a shift. So you're moving your body. So for me, it's been a little bit more about fuel of either I, on a busy shift, tend to not eat at all, or to eat exclusively just junk that's available and then makes you feel bad. And so there's all the cliches about you can meal prep. Some people do the factor. Some people just kind of accept their fate. I think the one piece of advice is that while there certainly will be rotations that are simply a little too hard to take care of yourself very much, they end. When I was on my trauma rotation and I was getting up at 3 every morning, I made a quiche every week, and I had quiche while I was pre-rounding. But, so little things like that. But I got up at 3 every morning, and I often got home after 9 o'clock at night. And on those rotations, I was not going to the gym. I was not meal prepping. I was hoping Parker was on an easy enough rotation that he could cook for me. And if not, I was having a banana with peanut butter going to bed. And there are going to be rotations. That's going to be what happens. And you have to give yourself some grace and forgive yourself a little bit. But I think the flip side is that it's always easy to say the next rotation will be easier. The next rotation I'll have a little more time outside the hospital, or next year will be easier. And your time always fills up, whether it's with research or activities or volunteer work. As you get older, you feel like you need to study more and prep more for your cases, and there's always more to do. So taking care of yourself, while maybe for a particularly intense week or two it takes a back seat, it can't take a back seat for every rotation. It's always easy to say next rotation. And so whether taking care of yourself means cooking good food, getting outside, or just actually, instead of staying in on it's beautiful weather out here, like I definitely have some work to do before a busy day tomorrow, but I think maybe we'll go for a walk or go play some tennis, because you have to just be able to rejuvenate yourself.
You guys have one of the best parks in the country right there in your back door. Yeah,
we do. We live in Central West End, which is right close to Forest Park, which is such an amazing resource. It's so easy to get out for a little walk or bike ride, or there's a great little pond with a boathouse, and you can just go sit and have a beer if you're not feeling energetic.
It's so nice. Yeah, that's a great area for sure. Do you have any advice or hints or tips for brand new residents listening to the podcast? Somebody who might be walking into the hospital for the first time and going through disorientation. Do you have any advice for them?
I think hopefully you're at a program where you have people you can look up to and ask questions from, and realize that it's not as competitive of an environment anymore, and that your co-residents, both in your class, are there for emotional support, and older classes are there to help you and remember what it's like. So hopefully you have that support there. 2, that everybody's an intern, and you're probably not the worst one. I guess somebody's the worst one, but it's probably not you. And that there are safety stops built in to help move you along through the process. And also that you are now the doctor in the room. I still introduce myself as Elle to my patients, and I think that's because I had a mentor who introduced himself as Will to all his patients, and that's the kind of doctor-patient relationship he wanted to have, and so I wanted to emulate that. However, I think it's very strange the first time you go into a room because the family wants to speak with the doctor, and you have to present the clinical plan to the team, and you have no idea what's going on. But you know more than you think you do, and having some confidence, and you're the doctor now.
Yeah, you have to strike a balance of confidence and humility, which is a hard one to strike. And I think at the very beginning, you probably have to lean more towards the humility. And even if it means you're asking a stupid question to someone who's more senior to you, you're making real decisions that impact the life of another human being. And hopefully you don't make any serious mistakes, but serious mistakes can be made. And if you are even slightly unsure of something, you want to run it up the chain. And everyone understands that, and hopefully you're at somewhere that is going to treat you well and not give you pushback for asking questions. And pretty quickly, the common issues that arise, you will learn how to handle yourself, and you will be able to make those decisions without even thinking about it very quickly, and you will not have to bother people more senior to you. But that healthy dose of humility at the beginning is very important, and you have to be comfortable calling a resident that is supervising you, or calling an attending, or flagging somebody down in the hall to ask how something gets done or how it's usually done, if you're at all uncomfortable with some decision. And that pretty quickly improves. Of course, it never improves all the way. You have attendings at the end of their career who are uncertain about things and will call their colleagues and review literature, right? Like, we're all always learning. You can't know everything. But at the early stages, you have to assume that you know nothing, and you have to verify things that you're not certain of.
And keeping in mind that even those most senior folks were at one time in your shoes, right?
100%. Yeah.
So what's next for you guys? What's down the road?
Maybe some tennis in the park, I think.
Yeah, we're cooking. Yep. So I'm on a very short research block as a recovery from my night float block. And I start on a joint rotation next week. So I'm trying to do a lot of studying. The weather's starting to get good in St. Louis. We're trying to spend some time outside. I'm hopefully cooking tonight, trying to take care of ourselves.
Long term, I'm still deciding probably between cardiology and oncology, which are, subspecialties off of medicine. So there will likely be another match that I have to go through, but I've got a little bit of time to think about that. There are always still open questions, and there are a lot of directions that you can take through the careers that Elle and I are building. So we're taking it one step at a time. It's nice to be able to take a little bit of your thought away from that at this period early in residency. It doesn't last very long. You do have to start thinking about your next step pretty quickly. It's frustrating at times. You think, hey, I just did this whole residency match. It would be nice to take a break and focus on what I'm doing day to day, but it doesn't last very long. So we're looking ahead and we're thinking of different options, and you just got to trust your instincts.
That's great. Of course, at PracticeLink, we focus a lot on residents and their first jobs, and we advise to start looking 18 months before you finish a program. So there's not a lot of downtime at all. Any last words of wisdom? Anything else you want to share? I would love to have you guys back. We haven't talked about anything about references. We haven't talked about letters of reference or CVs. There's a whole world of things that we could talk about. Little hints and tips that might make you stand out among everybody else, from the whole med school application all the way up through. So I would love to have you guys back if you'd be interested. We can wrap up. And if you have any last words of advice for anybody listening, I'm sure they'd be glad to hear it, whether they're even just considering medical school.
I think the closing thing for me is just that there's no 100% roadmap to this, and this is the way that we have done it and the way that has worked for us. But we've seen a lot of people do it very different ways, and you just want to bring something unique to the table, whatever that is. Everybody has something to add. So if there's something that we said that doesn't make sense to you, then toss it out. There's no one right way to do this, and that applies to everything, med school, residency, and on.
So my closing thought is lean on your team, on your mentors, on your older peers. If you don't like your mentors, find new ones. You got to put in the work. I'm sure, even if I'd be happy to talk to anybody who's interested in orthopedics, interested in WashU, and I think most people are happy to kind of share their journey in both the positives and the negatives.
Well, thank you both so much for being on the podcast today, and I will be in touch, I'm sure. Keep me posted on your progress, and if I can do anything for you guys, let me know. I'd be glad to, but all the best to you.